eloquent conductors are not the best musicians, and sometimes the awkward ones. Like a classic example of Reiner, who really, the baton technique was minimal, but when he did move, it was startling.
It was a real pleasure to connect with today's guest and go back in time into the mid-20th century and what the orchestral world was like then. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations. We're talking today with David Krehbiel. Dave is the former principal horn player for the Chicago Symphony, the Detroit Symphony, and the San Francisco Symphony, when I live here in San Francisco. And he has recently released an autobiography titled Through the Door, A Horn Player's Journey. Now, before San Francisco, I used to live in Chicago. So did Dave. I went to Northwestern University. So did Dave. In fact, I think he probably was there the same time that my uncle was there as a music major back in the 50s. So this was really fun. David, quite a character, and has all these great stories, from getting hired by Fritz Reiner, going to the hotel room to get hired by Fritz Reiner, to what it was like playing in the Chicago Symphony under that setup, a very different world. His time in Detroit, the Motown era, being principal horn there. He is quite a prankster, or has been through his life quite a prankster, so we get into that. His creative, not caring philosophy, and much more. I really hope you enjoy this. Quick shout out to our sponsors, Dorico, Ear Trumpet Labs, and Modacity. More on them later, but let's dive into this conversation with David Krehbiel. What motivated you to put this out? Now it's such fun, and I'm just like living vicariously through like this crazy set of eras, from auditioning for Reiner to retiring when MTT got to town. What inspired you to put this together?
Well, maybe it's a bucket list, or maybe it's getting toward the end. I'm 84 years old. And it's been 22 years since I retired. I played a little bit after I retired, but not much. But my whole life changed, and that's a past life. I don't really live there at all. But I was going through my notes and stuff I had that kept me going and sane as the principal horn player all those years. And I thought, well, I can't just throw these out. I've got to do something with them. So I started collecting and putting together. And mostly it was about how to play, what to do, and a lot about attitude. What kind of attitude does it take to do what you do? And that's when I came up with the idea of creative, not caring. Mm-hmm. But so I got into it, and I've always been bored with people telling me what to do and how to do it.
I got the sense of that in the book.
When I read these articles, studious articles, very detailed about what is that, and it just doesn't register. I'd rather talk about emotions in some way, and so I sort of abandoned the idea of putting together a how-to book, and just decided to do a book about why, who am I, what am I doing, how did this all happen to me? And when I look back, as you know from the book, the opportunities I've had are just absolutely amazing. That I've just walked through these doors that have been open to me. And one of my favorite stories in the book is about the conductor of the Westminster Choir, who I went to a concert, and it was so fabulous. And I asked, and he started out as a choir director at Stanislaus State, and now he's at the top of his. And I was really curious. I said, how did that happen? He said, the doors just opened and I walked through them. Hence the title of the book. And it so happens that I had a painting that I bought about 25 years ago. That's the cover of the book. And to me, it's just incredible. That painting has always fascinated me, because you see somebody stepping through a door into a different reality, into a whole new place. And that inspired me. I mean, here I've got this story of this choir director. I've got this picture, this wonderful picture I better write a book. So I started putting down all these stories, and people ask me, how do you remember all those things? And I don't have a strong memory. I don't remember, what I did yesterday and what day is this, but I do remember these wonderful moments in my life where either it was a practical joke or something we did that was exceptional, or on and on and on. Anyway, the stuff just comes out. Now, I'm starting on a second book, actually, which is a lot more serious. It has to do with spiritual, my life as an entity on this planet, and how I started out early on in a sort of a Christian background and went through all these various things. Again, the doors open, and here I walked into Gurdjieff work in San Francisco, and I walked into channeling stuff and raw material and on, and somehow ended up back with a bunch of people I knew when I was a kid in this church, but it's not really a church, it's more of a peace center, and it made sense out of all the things that I rejected before. I couldn't call myself any sort of fundamentalist in any way. I still resist all that, but I'm comfortable, and I'm going on and on here, but it seems to me at this point in my life, everything's related. Mm. Everything's related. And all these great religions, all these great philosophies, when you dig down through all the crap that people have piled on top of it, it comes out to be the same thing, that we're all one. And in a sense, we're all connected. And that's this idea of serendipity. And when we begin to sense that and acknowledge it, these doors open to us. Mm-hmm. And we fall into, like, you meet people and you feel a connection that for no reason at all, you feel connected to that person. And maybe it's been past lives or whatever, but
well, I look forward to checking out that book too. And I think you need a third book too, where you do nothing but crazy gig stories, because you have so many here. And I just know you had to, you probably didn't put them all out, but it's incredible. What a creative prankster you are. I love.
Yeah. Well, that's where the joy comes. Well, being a musician and sensing something really special about the music that we love and enjoy, otherworldliness maybe, mm-hmm. To be able to pry yourself out of this reality, whether you use drugs or music or whatever, and get out of yourself in a way that you escape your ego. That's the key, I think, and I think you understand all that. That's why we do what we do.
Well, it's just incredible it's fun because so many of it's just funny how you've got several decades on me, but there I could name like 10 things that we have in common, from where we live to I lived in Evanston. You're talking about Farkas punishing himself, walking back to Evanston, after. Yeah. And I could picture that so vividly. And, maybe I don't even, there are so many things we could talk about. So we'll have to do a round two at some point for sure. But Philip Farkas, he was a big influence, certainly not like he was on you. I never knew him, but I read The Art of Musicianship, that book that he put together. That was something I was reading in high school when I was growing up in South Dakota. And I would take notes on that. And then I heard so many stories over the years about what he was like in the orchestra. And it's funny because you two are so, seem to have had such a different philosophy on performance and life. Can you just talk about Philip Farkas? Because there's somebody that I've thought about a ton in my life, and you had direct experience with him.
Well, we had a wonderful relationship, and I think he thought of me as a colleague, or maybe even as a son in a way. But I realized that we were really opposite, and somehow we connected as opposites, in that he was very intellectual and very smart, and he came from his brain. He figured things out. When I studied with him, or when I played next to him, it was clear to me that he was getting the absolute maximum of what was on the page. He studied that music and all those marks there, and he projected that into some wonderful, successful playing all those years. But he approached it from a mental place, and I approached it from a emotional place. And this is why the story of when we were studying unmeasured etudes, and I had some ideas, and he had his thing figured out, and we'd negotiate. And I've always thought, that's ideal. If you've done a lot of teaching, to have a student that talks back to you and that understands deeper principles than just do it this way. Anyway, he was a very nervous player, and he would practice his solos in the basement before a rehearsal and before a concert. He'd go over it many times, a little solo that he had, and keep doing it. And he felt that he did his best playing when he was almost to the point of exhaustion. It's very interesting. So I'm sitting there as his assistant, and it's a real plus for me because he let me lead. He would just sort of play along and encourage me to lead the section. And as a 22-year-old assistant, what the hell was I doing that? But I learned that there's nothing more fun than doing that, than being the leader of a section and setting the tone. I never really told anybody how to play. I just figured that if I was convincing enough in what I did, they'd come along with me, and they always did. Anyway, I'm getting off subject of Farkas. A unique character, a wonderful sense of humor. I love to tell jokes, and he loved to hear jokes, and so I sort of kept him entertained a lot.
My practicing companion, Modacity, this awesome app, it is so great for getting you to really think about your practicing. And there's what's called a deliberate practice mode. It tracks everything that you are improving upon and time spent in every piece. And it's just so great. Here is founder and CEO of Modacity, Mark Gelfo, on what the app does.
I use the deliberate practice feature in Modacity a ton. So what I'm logging my improvements. I improved my articulation today by using this strategy. And then I see that in my log. So I see all the improvements that I made, the strategy that led to that improvement. I see the star rating as well as the time spent.
It is so satisfying to be able to look back on your history like Mark's describing. I do that all the time, and it keeps me inspired and energized and feeling like I'm really making progress. Learn more at modacity.co. And if you visit our site, we've got a special offer for lifetime access for this app. Thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Modacity. This episode is brought to you by Dorico, the advanced music notation software from Steinberg. And one of the coolest things about this piece of software, there's so many things, but one of them is their popover option. And it has sped up things so much for me when I'm working in scores. Here's Senior Product Manager Daniel Spreadbury on how popover mode works.
There's like hundreds of notations that you might want to create, and trying to remember what to type, was it Command Shift Alt, Vulcan Death Grip 7 for this particular notation. But the nice thing about a popover is all you have to remember is the letter of the thing you want to create. So D for dynamics, T for tempo, M for meter, K for key signature.
It might seem like a simple thing, but you would not believe how much that has sped up my workflow. And I'm not even really a composer. I do a lot of arrangements, I do a lot of exercises, but it has taken my workflow probably at least up to 5 times faster. Just that one mode. I can't say enough good things about Dorico. I love it. I use it every single day. There's a free version, Dorico SC, that you can download that lets you do practically everything for up to 2 stabs. So check it out. Dorico.com will take you to their page on Steinberg's website. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. You know, someone who I lived 23 years in Chicago. I'm not from Chicago, but I've lived there longer than anywhere else. And so and going to Northwestern, I played in the Civic Orchestra. And you're talking about all these legends. You know, I don't even know where to start. Like these stories of Fritz Reiner that you've got in there, which is like, to me, he's like a caricature of a dictatorial conductor, like the old school, you know, he defined old school conductor. There'd be a photo of him. And I remember at Northwestern, I used to work at the music library, and they would bring out the Reiner collection every once in a while, and I would see all his scores with his notes. And
oh, really? Did he donate it to Northwestern?
Yeah. Or somehow they ended up with it. I don't know if they still have it, but at least a couple decades ago they had it. And so Reiner's, and then all those incredible Chicago Symphony recordings, of course. And you auditioned for him. That's like the old school way, right? You went to his hotel room and
way before committees.
Yeah, and it didn't start well, right? Your first note didn't even come out, right? Am I remembering that right?
That's right. Well, that was the whole genesis of this idea of not caring, of releasing yourself from anxiety, of worried about what you're going to do or what you just did. It was a gift. It was, again, a door that I walked through because I couldn't play that first note. And on this first note I played that day, basically, and it was a low B flat, and it didn't speak, and I wasn't that great in the lower register anyway. So I just figured the audition was over. With Reiner, miss one note or do one thing and you're done. And so I just totally relaxed. And then the story goes, and I said it in the book, but I figured the audition was over. And so he goes over and he picks up this book. It's a brand new, it only been out a couple weeks of Farkas's Art of Horn Playing that Farkas very politically had given to Reiner. Signed it, you know. He was a very political guy. His studio was full of pictures of conductors that were admiring his playing, that he specifically go up and have a conductor sign a picture, you know, and he had that plastered all over his. Anyway, so Reiner looks at the book and he sort of thumbs through it, and finally he growls to me in this gravelly voice. He says, "Your teacher says you must loosen the arm brochure for the low notes." So I did it again, and it came out, and I played the rest of the audition, really not caring, because I knew it was over. And, you know, much later on, I realized what had happened, what a gift that first note, not speaking, had been. And I'm sure Reiner probably thought, well, I told the kid what to do, and he did it, so now, you know, this kid's pretty sharp, we can go ahead. No, but, the only reason I was there is because Farkas wanted me, he didn't want Reiner to go to New York and hire some hotshot horn player to come and be an assistant, and that would give him, he needed support. Farkas needed support. As great as he was, and as wonderful a player as he was, he was vulnerable to conductors and people, bad vibes, and people who didn't support him. And so I served a function there that was advantageous for both myself and for him.
I just think it's so remarkable you were able to maintain that creative, not caring sort of attitude. Like in that, it's like from small town California and then Fresno, and then you find yourself, you're playing under one of history's, and now we know, great conductors in this orchestra in these conditions that orchestra players today can't even imagine, right? Like you could be fired immediately for anything, and then you've got, you've got what sounds like a person who would cause me a lot of anxiety sitting next to you, Farkas, you know, just in turn, and like I just think it's remarkable that you were able to take that attitude and then you playing something like assistant horn, that's such a different world than mine, like double bass. You know, I can win in doubt, leave it out. It's not a problem, right? If that eighth bass player doesn't pitch, not a problem. It's a different story for the roles you played in all the orchestras you were in. But it's just remarkable to me that you were able to, what do you think, was it your upbringing that gave you that attitude? Or I just think so many people would have gone to pieces, auditioning for Reiner, you know, all those years.
Pure survival. Survival. It's like, how am I going to survive my attack, my nervous, my ego that doesn't want to be injured by screwing up. And believe me, it was difficult. I mean, it took me years to get to the place where I could really, and I think I mentioned in the book, I mean, I remember the last 15 years in San Francisco were pretty much, it was, I could hardly wait to get to the hall to play. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't in a place where I was hoping I was in an auto accident on the way to the concert so I wouldn't have to walk out on stage. But that's how it was in Chicago. And, you're presented with these challenges in your life. And you either survive or you don't. You figure out a way to survive. And I don't think there was no philosophy or anything that I read or anybody that helped me. It was sort of self-survival, whatever. And now it's coming out in the book, I guess. And, it's a funny thing. My sister, who's an artist, told me, yes, she read my book a couple of days ago, and she told me that yesterday she went out to her studio and she had this painting that she was totally disgusted with it. She was going to destroy it, and she called her husband. She couldn't fit it in the trash. She wanted him to cut it up so she could put it in the trash. And then she said, "What about this creative not caring?" So she took the picture down and she began to improve on it and paint over it and do stuff. And I thought, wow, what a wonderful story that is. To have an idea of letting go of your ego enough that you're not worried about being injured, to go ahead and muddle your way through it. There's something I want to talk about, and that's orchestras today. I feel it in the really big orchestras and even the community orchestras. So many people are overqualified. Mm-hmm. And there's a great risk of boredom, and they're not challenged. Now, as a first horn player, a solo horn player, you don't really have to fight that too much because there's always something but if you're in the second violin section and you're sitting next to somebody, you're playing the same music, looking at the same music off the same stand, and the person on the right, he's in heaven, she is in heaven enjoying this environment and being able to play this music. And the person sitting right next to him on the left is in hell. I can't stand bored still. I should have been a soloist. I should be in a quartet, or, I can't. So what's the difference in those two is attitude and taking responsibility for that attitude. It's so important. I often think about, the standards are so much higher than they were when I started 50, 60 years ago. Everybody, you can have an audition and take any one of the first 10 or 12 down there that, and I often think of one of my favorite stories is having a tuba audition. And there's all these wonderful tuba players around, virtuosos who play anything. They play cello concertos, they play horn concertos, they can do anything. And so they're looking to get a job in a really good orchestra, and so you come and you have this audition. So you listen to these people, and the best thing to do is pick the third person down. The third best one, because, or maybe the fourth, because the very best one, a virtuoso, he's going to be bored silly, sitting between the bass trombone and the basses, and having to blend with that damn bass trombone player who doesn't like, or, you know, the basses aren't doing it right. And I don't get any solos, and I don't, I play watermelons all, and the next guy may be the same, but the third guy is going to love sitting in an orchestra, feeling that sound, sitting next to the bass trombone and blending with the bass trombone, blending with the bass section, and he's going to want to hang out with the stage crew, work on his car backstage, in back of the auditorium, hang out with the stage crew guys and do some woodworking and stuff like that, just be a regular guy who's really loving his job. So this is the danger that we all have, because we're all so overqualified.
After several years of planning, I'm so happy that my course, Beginner's Classical Bass, is out on Discover Double Bass. This course is made up of 66, yes, that's a lot, video lessons which cover a wide range of topics on classical double bass, starting from taking your bass out of the case, which is very fun to film, and Jeff Chalmers of Discover Double Bass and I have a great blooper reel about that, and leading to different bow strokes such as staccato and portato. The topics also include posture, simple scales and arpeggios, left-hand technique, bowing technique, simple pieces which are fun to play, practice tips, and much more. You can learn more through the link in the show notes, or just visit discoverdouble-bass.com/Jason Heath. This episode is brought to you by Ear Trumpet Labs. They make an incredible mic for upright bass called the Nadine, and 6-time Grammy-winning jazz bassist and former Contrabass Conversations guest, Christian McBride, is a big fan. Christian says, as an acoustic bassist, it's very important for me to have this instrument amplified as naturally as possible. What I love about this microphone is that it makes the instrument sound exactly how I hear it in my head. Honestly, I don't know if you can get a better review than that. The Nadine is an instrument-mounted condenser mic with an incredibly clear, natural sound and great feedback rejection. Ear Trumpet Labs is offering a free t-shirt with mic purchase from their website. Just visit www.eartrumpetlabs.com/contrabass to claim yours and learn more about Nadine. That's such an interesting observation. It's something I've thought about so often. I remember Rex Martin, who taught tuba at Northwestern for years and years. Mm-hmm. He would sub a lot in the Chicago Symphony, and he was telling me a story about, I don't remember what piece they were playing, but they were coming off the stage, and one of the people on stage, there were tears coming down from their eyes because it was so moving, and the next person was just complaining about the conductor, which is every orchestra musician's favorite pastime, But it's just that story stuck with me, just how different that experience can be for the same exact people doing the same job on stage. And it's so interesting to me who gets that, or people become jaded or don't. Someone in the San Francisco Symphony I've struck up a friendship with, who was definitely there when you were there, is Brian Marcus, one of the bass players. I had Brian on my podcast a year or two ago, and we hang out even if I'm not subbing, if we're if he's in town or whatever. And he is into his 60s at this point, early 60s, and he says he's loving it just as much as day one, and even more. Really? And it's so cool because I think a lot of people think you get jaded as you get older, and certainly some people do, but it's really interesting the experience of those orchestra musicians and how different it can be for everybody on that stage.
Yeah, to find a way to enjoy what you do and make it meaningful is really a gift. Bill Ritchie was my favorite bass player in the orchestra. Yeah. We hung out a lot, I love Bill. Well, something went through my mind. I forgot what it was now.
Well, let me ask you while you're trying to, hopefully it'll pop back, but I got to ask you about two other colleagues if we rewind back to Chicago days before we leave Chicago, because two other, talk about a legendary brass section. I mean, that is the brass section. And throughout these eras, but you talk about Bud Herseth and you talk about Arnold Jacobs and another, I have Arnold's book somewhere here, though. Is it Wind and Song? I can't remember, but somebody that, and he was Rex Martin's tuba teacher. So I think I learned about him when I was at Northwestern. But can you just talk about those two legends of the music world, what they were like as colleagues, and we're going back 60 years or something.
Yeah. Well, Bud Herseth was a rock, you know. I mean, such an incredible orchestra trumpet player, so inspiring. And I sat for those 5 years I was there, 5 or 6 feet in front of his bell, and could feel the intensity of his playing. I mean, so confident and such a leader of the brass section. I mean, he's the one that sort of designed this whole concept of Chicago brass. I think it came from him as when he started there in 47 or something like that. It was a little bit old school. Old school meaning in orchestras back then, the principal players were on a pedestal and they got paid 2 or 3 times as much as the tutti players, and they sort of looked down their shoulder at the tutti players in a way. And so Bud Herseth, at the beginning when I was there, it was pro management, I say, and we were struggling. That's in 1958 and 59. There was no committee, no orchestra committee, and we had no union say at all, and unions sort of ignored us and sort of paid attention to the principal players and whatever. And Bud, you know, he was that way. Now, and I remember going down to the union, doing a protest. The tutti players, Wayne Barrington and some people were and Ray Still. Ray Still was the principal oboe player, and he was totally a progressive for the common man, you know, even though he was a principal oboe and a wonderful player. And I remember he and Bud Herseth facing off, and almost, actually, it might even had a sort of a fist fight thing out in front of the union. Because Herseth thought it was ridiculous to protest, and you know, and it was like our political situation now.
Yeah,
in a way. Now, toward the end of his life, from what I understand, Herseth totally switched sides and became pro for the common man in an orchestra, and didn't have. And I think partly because the management didn't treat him like he thought he should be treated, and he sort of joined the other side.
Okay.
And maybe it was that they began to try and push him out into retirement. Mm-hmm. And that's another whole story. I mean, I saw these wonderful players all my life who were the epitome of orchestra playing in their time, and tried to hang on too long. And they had a wonderful reputation, and then that reputation, you know, people don't want them around anymore, and they can't let go of it because it's their whole identity.
Yeah.
Their whole identity is tied up is this, more so than being a father or a husband or whatever. Tied up with this ego, tied up with the instrument. So to let go and quit means like giving up your whole life. You know, you hear so many times about people who retire and then they die a couple of weeks later. Well, anyway, that was Herseth. And Herseth, you know, at that time, I think that was the first time I realized maybe, and I don't want to badmouth Herseth, you know, a wonderful player like that deserves everything he gets, but it was the first time in my life I realized that sometimes the best players are not the best people, and sometimes the best people aren't the best players. And this is kind of a process of growing up in the music business when you realize that, I think, you know.
Yeah, that's a good. No one's ever put it to me exactly like that. Talking about that's such a astute observation. If we think about other areas of life, we can see that that's the case, as well. But that's interesting. That holding on for so long, past you obviously consciously, and you talk about it in the book. First couple seasons of Michael Tilson Thomas, and you were already planning your exit. I think you were in your early 60s, right, when you retired?
Yeah, I planned on quitting at 62, and I think that's, I already did 40 years, and as a principal player, I mean, I could have gone a couple more years, I think, but you have to quit and make room for other people. Mm-hmm. I mean, these players that hang on for 40, 50 years in a spot, and just think of the generations that come up that would be capable of playing that and would have the opportunity to do that and don't because somebody stays there. In Europe, things, they move them along quite differently. First horn players last 5-10 years, and then they move down into the section. Somebody else does it. We don't do that here.
It's so different here. Yeah, that's such an interesting thing about their system. I was actually there was a bassist named Jonathan Haskell from Chicago who played in the orchestra, the Swiss Romande. My pronunciation's terrible, but he was there for 40 years and retired last year. And he wrote an article in the Chicago Tribune about how hard it was to leave after 40 years, and just about what you're talking about, how your identity is tied up in this ensemble.
Yeah,
and what do you next? So I think, again, another remarkable thing that you had the self-awareness to say, let's step down, and make room for somebody else, or quit while we're still, people aren't shaking their heads. And my teacher at Northwestern, Michael Hovnanian, one of the Chicago Symphony bassists, came way, you had left a long time before he got there, but he was talking to me about what Bud Herseth was like, as his playing started to become a little more erratic, just what that was like. Cause he was still on a lot of the time, but it just wasn't, he wasn't batting, what he was, I guess.
Yeah, it's an amazing situation. Yeah. Well, you asked about Arnold Jacobs.
Yeah.
When I was there, he was way before he became famous. I mean, people studied with him, but those of us in the orchestra, like John Swallow for one thing, and some of the other players, we'd have breakfast before rehearsal at this little restaurant on the corner, and Jacobs would come in, and he was this big sort of teddy bear tuba player, and he'd come in, and he always was singing tuba parts. And so then we'd all start going, imitating him, and making fun of him. And, nobody took him seriously. He was a wonderful player, but he was just a tuba player. And so we'd make these jokes about devising and making a rectograph or an anoscope so you could measure your rectal pressure when you were playing a high C in the studio, stuff like this. And then there's the story of him falling on his tuba, and his revenge. In my book, I do mention it, where I set my horn down and I went around and opened the door for my wife, and I was backing out with my car, and I heard the scraping sound, and it was the front tire pushing the horn case along. And it didn't curl up on the horn case and crush the horn, but it was ready to. And I looked over, and Jacobs is standing fairly close, looking at this and smiling. The revenge for all those guys in the orchestra making fun of him falling on his tuba. Anyway, a jovial, positive, incredible person, in so many ways, and had such a huge influence on music, and especially on the tuba world, but in music in general, I think. And a wonderful bass baritone voice, resonant. And I think maybe he was a singer at one time too, because he had that kind of vocal projection.
Wow.
Anyway, Yeah,
I love that it seems like you couldn't ask for more different orchestral environments than like Chicago under Reiner, and then going to Detroit where you were like the captain of the prankster squad. It sounds like, and then that era in Detroit. What year did you take the principal horn job in Detroit?
let's see, 63.
Okay.
I was there from 63 to 72. And it was a loosey-goosey outfit, boy. It was, the horn section. We had, one of the guys would stand on his head on his chair in a rehearsal just for the hell of it. And the clarinet, Paul Schaller, the clarinet, principal clarinet, just used to get furious because we were always joking around and playing jokes back there and not taking life seriously. And we had this thing that was there before I got there in the Brahms Second Symphony. Da-da-dum, pa-pa-dum, da-da-dum, pa-pa-dum. And so the horn section, whenever you'd have dee-da-dum anywhere in the music, they'd articulate da-da-dum, like that, which meant up your ass. And so that was sort of prevalent, and the story in there about how Paul Perret, who was the former conductor emeritus, this wonderful little Frenchman. It's a really good conductor and a jovial, sweet guy. He looked like Fred Mertz, and I Love Lucy. Anyway, when he walked on stage, we go the horn section, da-da-da, because somebody told him that meant. And then somebody finally told him what it really meant. Oh my God! It was a zoo there.
I could picture, because I think a lot of audience members don't realize the level of goofing around that the nature of orchestral players, and it sounds like that was like a extremely jovial kind of crew there. But it's funny. I think maybe I don't think, at least most audience members I've talked to, don't realize the shenanigans that can be going on behind the scenes.
Well, yeah, it's a way to get relief from the anxiety and tension that involved with playing.
Yeah.
Going back to Chicago, it fleeted through my mind when we were talking, and you being at Northwestern with Charlie and Barbara, and Barbara Butler, Charlie Guy and Barbara, two trumpet teachers, and the story about Barbara and I. Women in the trumpet world, even 30 years ago, it was really difficult. Mm-hmm. Maybe not so much anymore, but Alison Balsam and some wonderful women trumpet players. But anyway, so she said, I don't know who in the blank you are, but you got to be a friend of Mark Lawrence's, because she knew she'd been had with this terrible practice joke. And when I thought about it, it was really mean. But so Barbara, she didn't know who I was then, but after that, she knew who I was. So she began to retaliate and try everything she could to retaliate in practical jokes. She, there was a story, and it's in the book, I think it's, somebody came on stage after a concert and they said, we're interested in interviewing somebody from the orchestra because the San Francisco Board of Supervisors is thinking about making the accordion the official instrument of San Francisco. And we want to know if any one of you wants to make comments about, yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, let me do it. So I got on stage, and on national television, the stage was cleared. Everybody's out of the honor. It's just an interviewer and a cameraman and myself. And they said, well, what do you think about that? And I said, well, if this happens, in the first place, the definition of a gentleman is somebody who knows how to play the accordion but chooses not to. And I said, and furthermore, if this thing goes through, we're going to start a bumper sticker campaign that says, use an accordion, go to jail. Anyway, so that went out on national television. Evidently, Bud Herseth saw it. He said, so he called up Barbara Butler and he said, did you see what Krehbiel said on national television? So Barbara got a hold of it. So she hired this actor. A couple weeks later, this guy called me with this mafioso voice, and he said he was from the Anti-Defamation for Accordion League in Wisconsin. and they put a price on my head. And I was no longer allowed to enter the state of Wisconsin and so on. Anyway, so we started back and forth, Barbara and I. And so I was teaching for a couple of weeks at Northwestern, subbing for Gail one time, when Barbara was still there. So I got some students to help me, and we found a wheelbarrow. And we went out on the beach with this wheelbarrow, and we picked up this about a 250-pound rock. We wheeled it into the music building. We wheeled it into Barbara Butler's studio and put it right in the middle of the studio. And so, of course, Barbara said that, thanked me for my presence and how it drastically improved the acoustics of her studio to have this rock in the middle of her studio. I don't know how long that rock stayed in there. I probably took it out when she left.
That is hilarious.
Well, she would do practical jokes on Mark. She called up Mark and told him that she was sending him a present and made this big bill up, and she hired a landscape architect kind of guy to load up this big rock and put it in the middle of his driveway so he couldn't put his car in the driveway. That was about a 200-pound rock, maybe more. So Mark, being Mark, he was completely, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? What should I do? So my son and I went over with the trailer, and we loaded the rock up and put it in my yard. And Mark was kind of helpless about doing the rock. Anyway, we're sort of off the subject. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I love it. So you came to San Francisco. It was in the mid 70s. What year did
72.
you? 72. Okay. Okay. So you were here, here for me because I live here. When they were finally getting Davies off the ground, right? And so you were there for that whole transition, and you were playing in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so you were, and so I remember talking to Shinji Ashima was in the orchestra, and then decided to go to the opera orchestra. But when you got there, you were playing in the opera house, right? That was symphony and opera were in the same place, right?
Yeah, but two separate managements. Yeah, and the symphony hired me, and the union said I couldn't. Adler wanted me to play in the opera, but the union wouldn't let me because I was a transferred student. So I had to wait 2 or 3 years before I could play in the opera. So the symphony had a sort of a program to provide employment for those people who didn't play in the opera during the opera season. We'd go out and do school concerts and so on. And when Ado came in, really it was his power or his impetus to finally get the thing separated, to build Davies Hall, to separate the opera from the symphony and make people, you couldn't do both. So people had to decide which way to go. And the story there really, it's also in the book, is the opening gala concert for the opening of Davies Symphony Hall, Beethoven Fifth, and it's Sunday afternoon. And we're playing along, big deal, television and everything. And we get to the end of Beethoven Fifth, and there's this place where it goes tonic, dominant, bum, bum, bum. And the horns go da-dee-da-dee-da-da-dum. Well, that's kind of a tricky little passage. It's in the lower middle register, and anyway, you have to be prepared for it. And so we're going with these chords, and we got to the chord thing, and we go boom, and this noise went, eep, bum, eep, bum, eep, bum, eep. And it took me about 2 times to realize it was my watch. The alarm on my watch was going on, and it just fit right in the hole. If it would have hit during the chorus, somebody would have heard it, but it somehow serendipity, I don't know, it landed right in the silence between those chords. And so I finally realized what it was, and I'm trying to shut the thing off, and then this little solo thing's coming up, and so and splat.
Oh, no.
Garbage, that whole thing. So the review said, that some doctor's beeper had gone off and so startled the horn player that he completely messed up the concert. So after that, Ado, whenever he'd come out before a concert, he'd look around, and he'd catch my eye, and he'd look down at his watch like this. So Ado, with Ado, I don't know, we had so many practical jokes, and it was such a fun time with him. I saw him a couple of years ago. I was down at the Music Academy of the West and doing a little master class, and he was conducting the student orchestra, Music Academy of the West. So we got together and had dinner together, along with Mark, and we laughed for an hour and a half, reminiscing about all these pranks that we pulled and stuff we did. I'm sure not many conductors have this experience of being treated that way, which is both good and bad, I guess. I don't know. We did have fun.
Yeah, you got great stories about him in the book. It's such a. And then when did Blomstad came into the picture, right? There was somebody, Ado, then there was somebody else, and then Herbert? What was the order of conductors?
Blomstad came after Ado.
Oh, okay. And what was he like? I've heard so many, Brian Marcus and many others in the symphony that are in the symphony now talk about him, and it sounds like he did a lot for the orchestra, just sort of like the level of the orchestra. What was he like?
Well, really a devout religious man.
Yeah.
And a Seventh-day Adventist, and a true believer in music and the essence of music. And we always used to joke about he talked about taking a score and walking in the woods with a score and studying the score, communicating with the score. A little bit awkward as a conductor in a way, which turned me off at first, but I soon realized that what he was doing and what he was trying to achieve musically, well, I talk about this in the book about sometimes the most eloquent conductors are not the best musicians, and sometimes the awkward ones. Like a classic example of Reiner, who really, the baton technique was minimal, but when he did move, it was startling, He had control at a incredible, there's an old story of when he was conducting in Pittsburgh, one of the bass players, his beat was so small, one of the bass players had a telescope. You know that story?
Yeah, I know that story, but tell it. I don't think it's been shared on the podcast.
Oh, well, during a rehearsal, I guess the bass player took out his telescope and was looking for the beat with the telescope. Well, he was fired instantly. That's it. It's the end of him. Anyway, yeah, sometimes, for example, a classic example is Ozawa, who nobody was more eloquent as a conductor. The way he moved with the music and the way his wonderful mind, and he had everything memorized, and he conducted the music, and it was always totally fascinating to watch him conduct. But if you didn't see him conducting and you heard a recording or a broadcast of it, no, just something was off a little bit. Well, Blumstead, maybe the opposite. I mean, his recordings and what he did were really special.
Mm-hmm.
And I just saw a broadcast of him conducting, I forget, Norwegian orchestra or something, and doing Brahms second. It was so incredible. I mean, I just teared up. It was him expressing that music in a way, with the minimal of movements, like Reiner in a way, but super expressive and with love in his eyes, and looking out at the players when they had something to play. He'd look at them and he encouraged them in a way, and like he was in heaven doing this. And wow, what an amazing thing. And he's 90 something now. He's still going. Yeah, he was an incredible person.
Isn't that interesting how you're talking these orchestras that you've been in, it's the highest level it gets, really. So the players, so what does a conductor add? I think that's such an interesting thing to think about, right? That weird conductor sorcery that really can take, because the San Francisco Symphony, the Chicago Symphony, the Detroit Symphony, these groups, they can play. You could get anybody up there and you would probably do a very good performance. But it's just interesting how some of these people have the power to just add that magic. Like it sounds like Blumstead had that, or at least often.
Yeah, I think so. In Chicago, I used to joke about they'd have a guest conductor and he'd try to have them play in a certain way, and it was a joke. We're going to play it our way. So heck with you. We do it this way. We're playing this Strauss tone poem. This is the way we play it, and if you can't follow us, that's your tough. Because it was like chamber music. The conductor Reiner always gave responsibility, never took responsibility. Always pushed you to be on your own and connect with other people. And I think it's a key to a really great conductor is a person that can trust and give responsibility and not be flailing around there trying to do something, but encouraging at another level, if that makes any sense.
Oh yeah, for sure. So 40 years, how many performances, who knows, right, that you did in these different orchestras? Are there any, like, I have a few moments I've done like 1/100th of what you've done or less, but like I still have a couple of performances that have stuck with me over the years. One, for whatever reason, was doing Mahler 3 in Japan with MTT in the middle of the summer. It was like 105 Fahrenheit or something. We were melting out there, but there was something about that performance that was really special to me. And I've got a few others. There must be, or are there some that like, a few of those moments that, like, if you think back on those 40 years in any of those orchestras, are there a couple that just immediately come to mind?
So many. I think, about my last week that I was principal horn, I played a Mozart second concerto on the program. It's like sort of a farewell gift for me to play this concerto. And that performance sticks in my mind. That to me was the high point of all the years that I played, because it sort of all came together there, and I was in a place that was a real gift. I remember walking out on stage, and it's like, you think, gee, this seemed like a good idea at the time when they asked me to do this with this. But then you get started, and all of a sudden the music takes over, and you're really in a wonderful place of being totally present in the moment. And what's coming out is there's no anxiety. It's just expression. Anyway, yeah, I think that those 4 performances of that concerto were certainly the high point for me. So many Mahlers and Bruckners and things. The story in my book about 9/11. I don't know if you remember.
Yep.
Going there on stage and preparing to play Mahler's 6th angry military symphony, and with the anxiety and the angst of the whole audience and the whole orchestra, knowing that just 3 days before that, the 9/11 had happened and killed all those people, and to open the season with the Star Spangled Banner, which we always did, but Michael played it sotto voce, muted strings, very softly. Everybody was teared up, and it was just the most incredibly moving experience that I've ever been about. Just playing the Star Spangled Banner with muted strings. And finished getting ready to play Mahler 6, and somebody in the top of the thing, the hall, hollers out, "Play ball!" And it ruined that whole concert. Michael, you could tell. Now, Michael's very vulnerable to that kind of thing, and you could tell it was like deflating a balloon. He was just totally disgusted. We were all disgusted. We were looking so forward to under-rehearsed Mahler 6 under those circumstances. Oh my God, this is going to be fantastic. This was going to be the performance of a lifetime. Everybody, only 2 rehearsals instead of 4, and of course everybody knew Mahler 6, but still, it was going to be like everybody's totally there, emotionally and physically and mentally. Anyway, to have this thing deflated like that by one person up in the gallery makes a person realize how vulnerable we are as artists and musicians, and we take this thing for granted so much that we're a little bit callous. We go on stage and we have these wonderful performances where we're connected in so many ways to everything and everybody, and we just take for granted that this can happen, and then when it doesn't happen, we realize that how special this magic is that can happen in a large ensemble that's really I don't have words for it. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, and this pandemic, if ever something was going to put that in perspective, I was playing a couple weeks with San Francisco Symphony back in February, and they were doing Nielsen 5 the following week, which I know you're quite familiar with those pieces. And everybody was the bass section was frantically practicing all these crazy licks, and they asked me to play, and I had kind of a busy week, and I couldn't do it. Boy, I wish I'd taken that week and played that Nielsen, because I who knows when we'll play orchestral music again, but it's going to be some interval of time, and I am not taking any concert for granted ever again. I'm not taking going to a concert for granted ever again. And I think a lot of people are in that same boat. So it's a special thing, isn't it?
Oh, it's a really incredible special thing if you're lucky enough to be involved in it. And if you know how to enjoy it, that's another thing about Blomstedt, his repertoire. Nielsen symphonies, I love every one. They're just so incredible, how Nielsen starts out and he's really a good composer. He makes this nice symphony and he's not getting any attention. Nobody's listening to him. So the next one's a little bit harsher. The next one. Okay, listen. Finally you get to the last one. It's these drum solos, pounding away. Okay, you guys take this. And then all the Sibelius symphonies, there's nothing more wonderful than Sibelius. And then Blomstedt loved Hindemith. He'd do Hindemith, and we'd, repertoire. And Yeah.
Well, that's such an interesting.
Right.
That's an interesting observation about Nielsen, though. I never even thought of that. It is kind of like please pay attention as we get into those. I mean, I know it's tough for everybody in the orchestra, but my goodness, Nielsen bass parts. The hardest concert I ever played in my life was Nielsen 5. I think it was the clarinet concerto maybe, and then some overture. So it was nothing but Nielsen, and it was like the most that orchestra. It was the most stress. It was a per service orchestra back in the Chicago area. It was the most stressed out I've ever seen that orchestra.
Really?
Oh, it was so yeah. So I mean, I guess I should be happy that he had such a high opinion of the double bass. But goodness, the new assistant principal in San Francisco Symphony, actually I think it was Brian Marcus said, hey, what should I do? What should I look ahead at? And Brian said, get that Nielsen 5 part now and start practicing. So.
Dave, thank you so much for chatting. It's always astonishing to me what a small world this music world truly is. And even though Dave's got a few decades on me, how similar in some ways, different in many other ways, but how similar our paths have been. So I appreciate it. I really enjoyed this book. He's got a great writing tone, writing style. Again, Through the Door, A Horn Player's Journey. That is linked up to in the show notes. It's on Amazon or wherever you get your books. Besides Amazon, I'm assuming. Yeah. All right. I sit down and do these episodes 4 at a time. This is number 2 of 4. I'm watching the clock because I got another interview in 29 minutes now. But is there anything I want to share right now? So many things. I don't even know. So many things that I don't even know what to share. So I guess I'll just say, if you ever want to get in touch with me, feedback@contrabassconversations.com is my email. I love reading messages from people. I get messages all the time. If you're not on our email newsletter, I would be honored if you to have a place in your inbox, and we send out a weekly roundup of what's going on in the bass world, including the podcast, but many other things as well, and share out a little bit on Tuesdays about something specific in the bass world, maybe a piece in our sheet music store, which you can find at doublebassblog.org/music, and doing videos on Tuesdays as well about various topics, some of those pieces, some stupid bass history videos, all sorts of things. I did a jazz bass lesson with Danny Zeman. He taught me the lesson and put that out a few weeks ago. And you can find all that obviously on, maybe not obviously, yes, obviously, on YouTube, youtube.com/Contrabass Conversations. Thank you to the team that put these episodes together with me. They are Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Mitch Mooring, Trevor Jones, and Krista Copper. Check out Mitch's basses. They rock at mitchmooring.com. And you're going to be hearing an episode with Mitch coming up soon. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.